The day she signed the divorce papers, her husband was in the Maldives with her best friend. She found out through a photo. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a tearful confession, just a small square image that appeared on her phone at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning while she was standing in her kitchen, making coffee. She no longer had any interest in drinking. Her best friend Maya had forgotten that Eleanor was still following her secondary Instagram account, the one she used for travel photos, the one she had never bothered to block her on because she had never imagined she would need to. The photo was of two hands intertwined on a white linen tablecloth. Maya's ring, the one Elena had helped her pick out 3 years ago, and next to it, a watch Elena had given her husband for his birthday 18 months ago, engraved on the back with his initials and a date that had once meant something. Elena stood in her kitchen for 4 minutes without moving. Then she put her coffee cup down very carefully in the sink, walked to the bedroom, opened her husband's sock drawer, and found exactly what she had spent 6 months telling herself she was not going to look for. She had known. That was the thing she would not say out loud for a very long time afterward, the thing that lived underneath everything else, like a stone at the bottom of a river. She had known for months, in the way you know things when you love someone, and love makes you stupid and generous, and willing to construct elaborate, alternative explanations for things that only have one explanation. The late nights, the new gym habit that produced no visible results because he was not at the gym. The way he had started laughing differently, a new laugh she didn't recognize, learned from someone else's sense of humor. She had known, and she had chosen not to know, which is its own kind of betrayal of yourself, the one that costs the most because there is no one else to blame for it. James Whitfield was 38 years old, an architect with a firm that had recently won a significant contract for a waterfront development, handsome in the specific way that had always made Elena feel, early in their relationship, that she was slightly lucky to be with him, which she understood now was something he had cultivated deliberately and maintained carefully because it was useful. She was 35, a former investment analyst who had left her career 3 years ago at his gentle, persistent suggestion that her hours were making their life difficult, that they could afford for her to take a break, that he just wanted them to have more time together. She had given up a career she was exceptional at because a man who was sleeping with her best friend had told her it was making their life difficult. She did not cry. She wanted to cry and found that she couldn't, which frightened her more than the photo had. She called her lawyer instead, a woman named Patricia who had sharp eyes and a voice like a closing door, and said, "I need to start divorce proceedings today." Patricia said, "Come in at noon." Eleanor said, "I'll be there at 11. What she did in the hour between the call and leaving the apartment was the thing nobody who knew Elena before that morning would have predicted, and the thing that anyone who knew her properly would have seen coming from a long distance. She sat down at her desk and started making a list. Not of grievances, not of things she'd lost or things she regretted. A list of assets. His, hers, theirs, and next to each one, a careful assessment of what was documentable, what was hidden, and what she suspected existed that she hadn't yet been able to confirm. Eleanor had been an investment analyst for 9 years before she gave it up, and a good one, and the specific skills that had made her good at it. The ability to see the shape of a financial structure from the outside, to identify where the bodies were buried in a balance sheet, to follow money through the particular kind of maze that people build when they don't want money to be followed, had not gone anywhere simply because she'd spent 3 years not using them. James had made a mistake that many intelligent men make about the women they underestimate. He had believed that the softening of her professional life meant a softening of her professional mind. He had let her see things over 3 years of a marriage she now understood he had never fully committed to, that he would not have let a sharper adversary see. Financial documents left open on shared computers, phone calls taken in the next room but not behind a closed door. The particular casual transparency of a man who has decided the person watching him isn't watching carefully. She had been watching carefully. She simply hadn't known until 7:43 on a Tuesday morning that she was going to need what she saw. Patricia, at 11, looked at the documents Elena placed on her desk and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Where did you get these?" Eleanor said, "I was in the house and they were in the house." Patricia looked at her with the expression of a woman who has had this exact conversation before and knows exactly what it means and exactly what to do with it. She said, "Give me 72 hours. James came home that evening to find Elena cooking dinner, which she did sometimes on Tuesdays, and he sat at the kitchen island and talked about his day with the smooth, practiced ease of a man who had been lying for long enough that it no longer required effort. And Elena listened and responded and kept her face exactly where she needed it to be, which was the hardest thing she had ever done, and also, in some cold and clarifying way, the most focused she had felt in 3 years. She was not performing calm. She was calm in the specific way of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the right moment to act on it, which is a different kind of calm entirely. Not the absence of feeling, but the precise management of it, feeling converted into fuel and stored carefully for when it would be needed. She said nothing about the photo. She said nothing about Patricia. She said nothing about the documents, or the list, or the 72 hours. She cooked dinner and cleared the plates and went to bed and lay in the dark next to a man she had loved for 5 years and listened to him fall asleep with the ease of someone whose conscience was either very clean or entirely absent. And she thought, in the dark, about the 11-year-old girl she had once been, who had decided she was going to be exceptional at something, and how that girl deserved better than the decade of choices that had led to this bedroom, this darkness, this man sleeping peacefully next to the wreckage of what he'd done. She was not going to be small about this. That was the decision she had made somewhere between the kitchen and the bedroom, the thing that had settled into place while she was clearing plates with steady hands. James had spent 3 years making her feel smaller than she was, smaller professionally, smaller socially, smaller in her own estimation of what she was worth and what she deserved. She was not going to respond to that by being small. Patricia called on Thursday morning. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who has found something better than they expected. "The waterfront development contract," Patricia said. "His firm won it 6 months ago." "Yes," Eleanor said. "He has a silent partner on that contract. The silent partner's stake is held through a shell company registered in Delaware." Eleanor already knew what was coming, in the way you know things when you've been watching carefully for 3 years. "And the shell company is jointly owned," Patricia said, "by your husband and a woman named Maya Chen." The silence on the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. He gave her a stake in his biggest contract, Eleanor said. Worth, at current projections, somewhere between $4 and $7 million over the next 3 years, Patricia confirmed. Funded, in part, through the joint investment account you and your husband established 5 years ago, from which he has been making regular transfers for the past 18 months in amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. Elena sat down. Not because her legs gave out. They didn't. But because she wanted to be seated for the full weight of what she was about to say. He has been using our joint money to fund her stake in his business. That is what the documents suggest, yes. Which means I am part owner of that stake. Patricia's voice did something that in a less composed woman might have been a smile. That is one legal interpretation, yes. There are others. I would like to explore all of them with you in my office this afternoon, if you're available. Elena was available. What followed was not a single dramatic confrontation in a room full of witnesses, though there was one of those eventually, and it was as satisfying as anything Elena had experienced in recent memory. What followed first was 6 weeks of careful, precise, absolutely silent legal and financial work conducted entirely without James's knowledge, during which Elena continued to cook dinner on Tuesdays and respond to his messages and maintain the surface of a life that was being quietly and methodically dismantled underneath. She was very good at it. Better than she'd known, better certainly than he'd imagined when he'd suggested, 3 years earlier, that her career was making their life difficult. The confrontation, when it came, was in a conference room. Patricia on one side with Elena and 2 associates. James on the other side with his lawyer, a man who had clearly not been fully briefed on what the morning would contain, because he went pale in a way his client did not, when Patricia opened her folder and began to speak. James looked at Elena across the conference table. She met his eyes steadily and said nothing, because Patricia was saying everything that needed to be said. And she was saying it with the precision of someone who has had 72 hours and then 6 weeks to prepare. And because Eleanor had learned, over the course of a marriage that had taught her more than it had given her, that sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is be completely calm. He had expected her to cry. She could see it in his face. The particular, surprised recalibration of a man encountering a version of his wife he had decided, somewhere along the way, didn't exist. He had expected grief or rage or the kind of wounded desperation that would have made this easier for him, cleaner, a clearer emotional victory. He had not expected the woman sitting across the table from him, composed and specific and prepared, who had spent 6 weeks being better at his own game than he was. Maya was not in the room. Maya would have her own separate reckoning, in the form of a very specific legal letter that arrived at her apartment that same morning. The timing coordinated by Patricia with the precision that Elena had come to deeply appreciate. Elena did not hate Maya, exactly. What she felt about Maya was colder and more final than hate. The complete withdrawal of care, clean as a door closing, leaving nothing behind it. The settlement took 4 months. It was not the settlement James had intended when he'd begun the process of preparing to leave, back when he'd imagined Elena would be too undone to read documents carefully. It was considerably less favourable to him than that, and considerably more favourable to Eleanor, who walked out of Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon in March with a financial position substantially better than the one she'd had when she walked into her kitchen on a Tuesday morning 4 months earlier and found a photo she'd already halfway known was coming. She stood on the sidewalk outside the office building in the thin spring light and breathed the particular air of a person who has finished something difficult and is standing at the beginning of whatever comes next, which is the most open and the most frightening place a person can stand. Her phone buzzed, a message from a number she didn't recognize, which was unusual because Eleanor was careful about her number. She looked at it for a long moment before opening it. You handled that with more precision than anyone I've watched navigate a situation like that. I'm sorry for what he did. I'm also, if I'm being honest, somewhat in awe of how you responded to it. My name is Daniel. We've never met. I would like to change that, if you're open to it. I understand completely if you're not. Elena stood on the sidewalk in the thin spring light and read the message twice. Then she looked up at the building across the street, instinctively. The way you look when you feel watched, and on the 3rd floor, in a window of what appeared to be an office, a man was looking down at the street. He didn't move when she looked up. He didn't pretend he hadn't been watching. He simply looked back with the directness of someone who has decided that honesty, in this particular moment, is the only approach worth trying. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back down at her phone. She typed, "How do you know any of that?" His reply came in under 10 seconds. Because James Whitfield has been a problem in my professional life for 2 years, and I've had people watching him. I wasn't watching you, and then I was. I apologize for that. I'm not sure I apologize for what came from it. Elena read that twice, too. Then she looked back up at the window. He was still there. She typed, "You have 10 minutes. There's a coffee shop on the corner. If what you say in those 10 minutes is interesting, you get 10 more. She didn't wait for a reply. She walked to the coffee shop on the corner and sat down at a table that faced the door, ordered a black coffee, and waited with the composure of a woman who has just dismantled a marriage with forensic precision and is in no hurry to be impressed by anything. He arrived in 4 minutes, sat down across from her without asking if the chair was free, looked at her with the attention of someone genuinely trying to see rather than simply to be seen. And then he said something that nobody in Eleanor's recent memory had thought to say. He said, "Tell me what you want next." Not what happened. What you want now. She looked at him across the table. Nobody had asked her that in 3 years. Possibly longer. "That," she said slowly, "is a very good first 10 minutes. She gave him 10 more.